Chapter 1. The Withering. The village of Grotholt lay cradled in the gnarled arms of the forest, like a forgotten secret. A scattering of moss-covered thatch roofs clung stubbornly to a winding dirt path, surrounded by swaying pine and ash trees that whispered in the wind like gossiping old crones. Mist gathered in the hollows and rolled across the cobbled lanes, thick with the scent of wet earth and something faintly acrid, like mildew on damp stone. In the oldest house near the edge of the woods, where ivy strangled the windows and shutters creaked like mourning wails, Elya Varn sat by her mother's bed. The room smelled of drying herbs, burnt tallow, and decay that no tincture could hide. Faint candlelight flickered against the cracked plaster walls, casting long, trembling shadows. A bowl of bitter-root tea sat cooling on the windowsill, untouched. Magda Varn lay still beneath a threadbare quilt, her once strong frame now reduced to skin and bone. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow, and her eyes half-lidded, darting about beneath bruised skin as if caught in a fever dream. Elya, no more than 17 winters, wiped a damp cloth across her mother's brow with shaking hands. Her auburn hair was tied back with twine, face pale from sleepless nights, and fingers stained from grinding roots and peeling bark for salves that no longer worked. Her voice was soft when she spoke, a whisper that trembled like the candle flame. "I'll find something, Mama. Just hold on, please." Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the distant baying of wolves. Or perhaps it was laughter. Grotholt had always been a quiet place, but in the past year it had grown quieter still. The sickness had come first, creeping in like frost beneath the doors. Not a plague, the village elder said. No, not that. Just a bad season. But Magda's illness lingered when others healed or perished. Then came the rumors. "There, cursed," hissed the tanner's wife when Elya passed. "Her mother lay with a hedge witch, or worse." "Best not take her bread," muttered the cobbler to his apprentice. "Folk who eat it tend to fall ill." Children no longer played near their cottage. The priest of Sigmar refused to bless their home. Even the hounds growled when Elya approached. Still, she endured. Each night she scoured the hills, foraging through frost-bitten underbrush for anything with a trace of healing in its veins. She had memorized every herb in old Alden's almanac, and when that failed, she resorted to folk remedies whispered by crones long dead. Still, Magda withered. Elya had prayed first to Sigmar, then to Shalia, goddess of mercy, and even to Tal, hoping the god of nature might offer a cure hidden in bark or blossom. Her knees were bruised from kneeling, her fingers blistered from offering flame and blood. She chanted every name in the old hymnal until her voice cracked. But the gods were silent. That night the storm rolled in thick and low. Rain tapped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Magda had grown cold, her breath barely visible in the candlelight. Elya sat alone, numb with despair, staring into the hearth as the fire burned low. Something inside her broke. She stood, tied her cloak tight, and stepped into the rain. The woods were darker than ink, branches clawing at her face and sleeves like the hands of the drowned. Mud sucked at her boots as she wandered deeper, guided by instinct more than sense, away from the beaten trail and into the forest's throat. She did not know what she sought, only that she had exhausted every pure and holy option, and still her mother died. The whispers of the villagers echoed in her skull. Cursed, natural, witch-blooded, so be it. She walked until the air changed. It was subtle at first, the shift in the temperature, the oppressive weight of stillness pressing against her skin. Then came the smell. Sweet and foul, like flowers blooming in a grave. The trees bent in unnatural ways, their bark blistered with pus-colored lichen. Moss clung to everything, weeping slime, and the roots moved slightly, as if breathing. The mist grew thicker, greenish and clinging. Shapes twisted inside it, bulbous growths, half-formed faces grinning without lips, flowers with teeth. Flies buzzed lazily in the air, too numerous to swat away. Elya stopped in a small clearing where the ground pulsed like something alive beneath her feet. A tree stood in the center, grotesque and magnificent, its trunk gnarled into a spiral that oozed sap as yellow as bile. Around its base bloomed hundreds of strange blossoms, petals veined with black, stems of bruised purple, roots curled like grasping fingers. And there, at the foot of the tree, lay a stone altar covered in moss, bone, and rot. Elya's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, but her legs locked in place. A presence watched her, not from the shadows, but from everywhere, all at once. Warm and thick, like being submerged in stagnant bathwater. A voice gurgled up from the roots, wet and tender. "You seek mercy, little flower." She trembled, mouth dry. I want to save her." A deep, bubbling laugh, as of 1,000 throats laughing underwater, echoed through the glade. Then, kneel. Her knees hit the soft ground, sinking slightly into the loam. The flies didn't flee her. They gathered around, dancing in spirals. "Love is a beautiful sickness," the voice crooned. "And I, the father of all such joys, shall grant you what you seek." A gust of wind swirled the mist, revealing a bloated figure among the vines, its shape shifting like a boil ready to burst. Not quite a man, not yet a monster. Antlers of bark crowned its head, and its mouth spilled blossoms with every word. "All it costs is your soul." And as the glade pulsed with the heartbeat of rotten life, Elya, soaked in rain and grief, whispered, "Yes." Chapter 2. The Whisper in the Mists. The world held its breath as Elya knelt before the weeping tree. The glade was silent now, save for the slow, rhythmic dripping of viscous sap from the bark, each drop hitting the soil with a sound like a heartbeat. The mist coiled thick around her, warm and wet, carrying the scent of rotting fruit and honey gone sour. Her cloak clung to her back, heavy with rain and fear. Something moved within the fog. It began as a rustle, the faint suggestion of steps sloughing through damp earth. The branches shuddered as if in anticipation. Elya rose unsteadily, clutching at the edge of the mossy altar for balance. The air grew thick, oppressive. A shape began to form within the mist, a dark figure swathed in robes of black and green stitched from what looked like burlap and skin. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each step. His robes trailed behind him like a river of decay, dragging over the wet soil. When he finally emerged into the clearing's dim light, she saw that he was enormous, taller than any man she'd ever seen, broad and hunched. The hood that shadowed his face dripped with slime, and where light touched the fabric it glistened like oil upon water. He smelled of damp grave soil and crushed herbs left too long to rot. When he spoke, his voice was not one, but many, a wet chorus of whispers, sighs, and laughter layered together like the sounds of life decaying. "Child of sorrow," the voice said, "you've come far through the cold and the dark. Why do you trespass in the Garden of Endings?" Elya tried to speak, but her throat burned with the mist. Her voice came out weak, trembling. "My mother is dying. I've prayed to the gods of light, but they do not listen. I'll do anything." The figure tilted its head. Beneath the hood something shifted, a glimmer of movement, perhaps eyes, or perhaps maggots crawling across rotted flesh. A long-fingered hand emerged from the robe's folds, pale and blistered. the nails blackened and cracked. When it gestured, the air seemed to bend. "Anything," he echoed, savoring the word. Elya nodded before she could stop herself. The act felt like stepping off a ledge she could not see the bottom of. The figure chuckled softly, the sound thick and mucus-filled air. "Mortals always come to us when the bright gods fall silent. You beg for mercy, and mercy you shall have. But mercy wears many faces." "Who are you?" she whispered. "I am a servant of the blooming Father," he said, spreading his arms wide. The mist curled around him lovingly, revealing that his robes were alive, stitched together with vines and veins, from which tiny mushrooms sprouted and released pale spores into the air. A gardener of change, one who tends the gardens of his joy. You may call me what your tongue can bear. I am his herald, his voice upon your sorrow. Elya's eyes stung, her heart thudded painfully. The blooming Father. The figure smiled beneath the hood, or something like a smile formed there. He who loves all life, he who brings renewal through decay, he whose touch is both death and birth. You know him, though you fear his name. The mist seemed to pulse, and in its patterns she thought she saw shapes, swollen bellies bursting into blossoms, corpses turning into flowering mounds, children laughing through masks of fungus. The grotesque and the beautiful intertwined, inseparable. "Nurgle," she whispered without understanding why she knew it. The name hung in the air, thick and alive. The gardener bowed slightly. "Ah, you know his name, then. That makes this easier." Elya swallowed hard. The name felt heavy on her tongue, but it didn't taste of evil. It tasted warm, earthy, like the smell of rain after long drought. "My mother," she said. "Can you heal her?" "I can make her whole again," the gardener said, taking a step closer. The earth seemed to bloom beneath his feet, tiny white flowers opening in his wake. "I can wash away her sickness, her suffering. Her lungs shall fill with sweetness again. Her blood shall flow with vigor. She will laugh once more, as she did in the days when you were small." Elya's breath caught. "Please, yes, please. I'll give anything." The gardener raised his hand, and from within his robes he drew forth a tiny seed. It pulsed faintly with green light like a living heart. "A gift," he murmured. "Plant this within her flesh, and she shall rise renewed." She reached for it, trembling. "What do you want from me?" The gardener's laughter was soft, almost kind. "You mortals always ask that after." He stepped closer, and the smell of him hit her full force, rot and sugar, sweat and soil. "Only what you no longer need, little flower. Your heart and your soul. They will not be missed, for he will love them as his own." Elya froze. So? He tilted his head again. "A fair trade, is it not? A fleeting spark for a lifetime of joy. Your mother's life for your devotion. You will be loved beyond measure, cherished by the Father of life eternal. No more loneliness, no more loss." The words fell around her like a soft rain, and she felt warmth unfurl inside her chest. A strange calm settled over her fear. It felt right in some strange, twisted way. The other gods had ignored her tears. This one, this terrible, reeking god, answered. "I'll do it," she said, voice breaking. "Please, I can't lose her." The gardener reached out and placed the seed in her palm. It was warm, almost too warm, and pulsed faintly, beating in time with her own heart. The touch of it made her visions swim with strange colors, green and gold and black. "Then it is done," the gardener whispered. His hand brushed her cheek, rough, wet, and strangely tender. "Go, and plant love where despair once lived. In her chest, near her heart. The Father will do the rest. The mist began to shift again, thickening around him until his form was nothing more than a dark silhouette fading into the fog. His final words slithered through the air like a lullaby sung by worms. "Remember, my child, life and death are not enemies, they are lovers entwined." And then he was gone. Elya stood alone in the clearing, her breath shallow, the seed glowing faintly in her trembling hand. The rain had stopped. The mist began to thin, and the forest seemed to sigh as though exhaling. She looked down at the seed, its pulse matching her own, and felt the faintest smile touch her lips. There, for the first time in many months, she felt something dangerous and sweet take root within her. Chapter 3. The Bloom. Dawn broke sluggishly over Grotholt, the light thin and sickly, as though the sun had caught a cold and could not summon the strength to rise properly. The mist still clung low to the ground, reluctant to depart, and the wind that whistled through the twisted trees carried with it a new scent, something strangely sweet, like nectar left too long in a bottle. Elya Varn stood at the edge of her mother's bed, her eyes wide and rimmed with dark shadows. Her hands trembled as she pressed the seed, the warm, pulsing thing gifted by the gardener, gently against the hollow above Magda's heart. Her mother's skin was paper-thin, almost translucent, the blue veins beneath like roots beneath frosted glass. The moment the seed touched her flesh, it sank, not burrowed or pierced, sank, as though the skin had parted willingly to accept it. Magda inhaled sharply. The breath was deep and ragged, like the first gasp of someone pulled from deep water. Her back arched, bones cracking beneath the sudden jolt of life. A low moan escaped her lips, followed by a shudder that rippled through her emaciated form. Elya fell back, hands pressed to her mouth, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of the fire's crackle. She wanted to scream, to cry, to laugh, but all she could do was watch. Her mother's breathing grew stronger. Color, though not quite natural, returned to her cheeks. Her lips flushed a bruised pink. The hollows of her face filled. Her hands unclenched from their claw-like grip on the bedsheets, and her eyelids fluttered open. "Elya!" Magda's voice was low, rough, but unmistakably alive. Tears spilled down Elya's cheeks as she threw herself forward, clutching her mother in a trembling embrace. Magda coughed weakly, then chuckled, laughed, a sound Elya had not heard in over a year. "You're warm," Elya sobbed, pressing her cheek to her mother's. "You're warm. I feel strange," Magda murmured, brushing Elya's hair from her face. "But strong, like I've slept through winter and woken in spring." The scent hit them both at once. At first it was delicate, honey and lilac, clover and crushed mint, but underneath it lay something murkier, rotting fruit, mold creeping through damp stone, the perfume of something sweet that had died too long ago. Elya pulled away and looked around. The floorboards were soft beneath her feet, damp. She blinked and realized they were no longer bare wood. Fine green moss had begun to sprout between the planks, and from the cracks in the walls, small tendrils of vine had slithered forth like lazy serpents waking from slumber. She turned to the window and gasped. The garden outside had erupted into color, but not any color she had ever seen in nature. The flowers glowed faintly in the dim morning light, petals twisted into unnatural spirals, their colors shimmering like oil in water, greens too green, blues that shifted to crimson when viewed at an angle. Huge blooms hung heavy from thick stems, and their centers blinked slowly like sleepy eyes. Butterflies flitted among them, but their wings were transparent and ragged, trailing dust as they flew. The air buzzed. Flies. Hundreds. No, thousands. They clung to the window panes, to the eaves, to the flowers themselves, crawling in and out of the blossoms with an intimacy that made Elya's skin crawl. She stepped back, heart fluttering. "What is this?" "It's beautiful," Magda whispered behind her. Elya turned, stunned to see her mother standing, in her nightdress, eyes bright and lips curled into a blissful smile. She walked barefoot toward the window, unbothered by the buzzing insects or the film of green creeping across the floor. "It's alive," she said softly, pressing a hand to the glass. "All of it. I feel it singing in my blood." Elya blinked, and the corners of her vision shimmered. She pressed her fingers to her temples, swaying slightly. The scent of flowers and decay grew heavier, cloying. Her chest tightened. She coughed, once, twice. Something caught in her throat. She bent forward, gagging, and expelled a thick cloud of green dust. It floated before her, sparkling like pollen in sunlight. Her heart should have raced in fear, but instead she felt an overwhelming warmth spreading through her chest. The fear dulled. A giddy sort of joy bloomed where her dread had been. She laughed, confused by the sound of her own voice. Did I just cough up? Magda turned to her, her eyes glassy but kind. "It's all right, my darling. It's part of the change. You brought the spring back to us." Elya blinked again. Her mother's skin glowed faintly, a sheen of moisture over her face like dew. Her hair, once gray and brittle, now hung in thick, dark coils, threaded with vines that moved slightly on their own. The cottage was no longer a house. It was a womb, a greenhouse of sacred rot. The walls pulsed, the beams creaked, not with age, but with growth. Elya stumbled back toward the hearth, breathing in slow, shuddering gasps. Her lungs tickled with spores. She coughed again, and again the green mist poured from her lips, but now it felt right, like releasing pain she didn't know she'd held. She laughed again. A low chuckle echoed from somewhere unseen, perhaps from the floor, or the rafters, or from within the flower on the sill that now turned to face her. Psychologically and sociopath, she fell to her knees, laughing and crying all at once. She felt alive in ways she never had, every nerve alight with sensation, every scent vivid, every sound a melody of nature's breath. And outside, the garden swayed in time with her laughter. Something ancient had taken root, and it was blooming. Chapter 4. The Rot Beneath. Spring came early to Grotholt that year, or so the villagers whispered. The frost melted quicker than usual, the snow bleeding into soil that drank greedily, swelling with promise. Where bare furrows should have waited for the sowing season, green erupted like a secret too long kept. The fields, once meager and gray from years of sickly harvests, now pulsed with unnatural vigor. Stalks of barley grew twice as tall as a man in a fortnight. Fat, swollen gourds clung to vines like parasites bloated on blood. Wheat shimmered not gold, but a strange shimmering hue somewhere between yellow and bruised purple. Corn burst from the husk with kernels that oozed sweet, viscous nectar instead of juice, and potatoes pulled from the soil came out not with dirt, but fine white mold clinging to them like a second skin. But no one complained. They praised the soil, blessed the sky, wept with joy in the furrows as they harvested vegetables too large for their baskets. Even when some pumpkins burst open on their own, revealing soft, quivering flesh crawling with black larvae, the villagers merely laughed, scooped out the insides, and called it tender meat. Children rolled in dandelion fields and came back covered in strange rashes that looked like blooming flowers. Bees the size of a thumb drifted lazily through the air, wings coated in yellow dust. The livestock grew fat, though some began to develop strange tumors that pulsed with heat, but they were warm and docile, producing more milk than ever before. The whole village seemed reborn, and at the center of it all was Elya. Wherever she walked, flowers opened. Vines crept from stones to curl around her ankles. Children followed her like ducklings, their faces smeared with pollen, offering her twisted bouquets of fungus and weeds that smelled too sweet to be natural. The old women touched her hands with reverence, kissed her cheeks with tears in their eyes. Blessed girl, they called her, our little spring goddess. The men offered baskets of crops, jars of honey, bundles of herbs. One carved her face into a tree trunk and burned incense beneath it, murmuring prayers she couldn't quite hear. They bowed their heads when she passed, eyes wide and fever bright. Lips curled into smiles that didn't blink. Elya should have been afraid. But she wasn't. Because when night fell and the world quieted, the dreams came. Not nightmares. Not anymore. At first they were whispers, soft as wind through tall grass, sweet as lullabies murmured through rotten teeth. A voice as deep and warm as loam, cooing into her ear as she slept beneath the living roof of her cottage. It called her by 100 names, beloved root, blossomling, my little sporeshine. The voice was always kind, always full of love. In her dreams she walked through vast, endless gardens where trees bled sap the color of emeralds, where flies buzzed in symphonies and each petal opened to reveal a mouth that sang praise. There were creatures, too, short, round things with grinning faces and bloated bellies, tumbling through fields of fungal carpets, always laughing, always calling her Mama. In those dreams she danced barefoot through meadows that smelled of death and honey while the sky rained down seeds that melted into the skin and sprouted from within. And above it all, unseen but ever present, was the Father. Papa Nurgle. He never appeared, but she felt him, watching with infinite affection, proud, delighted, overflowing with love so thick it choked her with warmth. She would wake with tears on her cheeks and a smile on her lips, her hair threaded with moss, her breath perfumed with spores. Magda noticed, of course. Her mother had changed too, though in quieter ways. Her skin was always damp now, but glowing. Her hands trembled when she prayed, and sometimes she whispered in her sleep about roots growing through her bones. But she smiled often, and when she looked at Elya, it was with something like awe. The garden surrounding their cottage was now unrecognizable. It had swallowed the fence, broken through the cobblestone path, risen over the roof in creeping vines. Strange fruits hung low from thorny branches, swaying despite the still air. Insects danced between petals that opened like mouths and hissed when touched. Mushrooms the size of cushions lined the walk, puffing spores when stepped upon. Elya sat in the middle of it most days, weaving garlands from soft tendrils and singing songs she no longer remembered learning. Her voice carried strange harmonies now, undercurrents of chimes and insect wings. Sometimes she heard them, too, beneath the soil, tiny voices, giggling. The roots whispered secrets, the flowers leaned toward her. The earth felt alive beneath her fingers, warm and pulsing. One morning, as she bit into an apple swollen with veins of gold and soft mildew, a young girl ran up the path toward her, breathless and laughing. Elya squealed. Mr. Hanser says his cabbages spoke to him last night. They sang lullabies to him in his dreams. Elya tilted her head, mouth full of sweet moldy pulp. She chewed slowly, swallowed, then smiled. That's wonderful, she said gently. The garden is growing in all of us now. The child beamed and handed her a handful of flower petals, each one speckled with black spores. Elya accepted them with care, pressing them to her chest. That night, as she lay beneath the canopy of crawling vines and petals that glowed in the dark like stars, Papa Nurgle whispered again, "They love you, my blossom, as I do. You've brought joy to a dying world. Let the rot take root, and you shall never be alone again." Elya's eyes fluttered closed. The garden outside swayed with invisible breath. And somewhere beneath the house, in the damp dark beneath the floorboards, something began to grow. Chapter 5. The Festival of Blossoms. The banners were made of lichen-stained linen dyed in hues no loom had ever woven. They flapped lazily in the thick, damp breeze, sagging under the weight of dew and spores. Strung from tree to tree across Grotholt's village square, they formed a sagging canopy beneath the gray spring sky. Beneath them, the villagers worked with tireless glee, hands covered in pollen and dirt, humming strange happy tunes that sounded half-remembered and older than language. What had once been the market square, a few stalls and a cracked well, was now a living garden. The cobbles were choked by moss, flower beds bursting with blossoms that opened and closed with a sigh as though breathing. Giant fungi grew where barrels of grain once stood. Brightly colored puffballs swayed on stalks that seemed to lean toward passing villagers, trailing tendrils of golden dust. It was the Festival of Blossoms. No one had planned it. No one had spoken a word of it before it began. One morning a child placed a crown of petals on Elya's head, giggling. By dusk a feast had appeared in the square, and the elders were busy erecting an altar built from woven vines and bones bleached white by the sun. There was no priest to lead them, only the gardener's whispers that echoed in their dreams, and the songs the children sang without knowing where they had learned them. Tables overflowed with food, breads that squirmed faintly when sliced, honey-glazed roots that wept syrup, meats so tender they fell apart at the touch and oozed fragrant juices. Stews bubbled in cauldrons, thick and greenish, filled with unfamiliar shapes. No one questioned, no one turned away. They feasted, they laughed, they danced. Elya stood at the heart of it all, radiant beneath the veil of spores that clung to her lashes like snow. Her gown was stitched from moss and petal, wrapped around her body like living vines. The villagers had sewn it overnight, whispering to the fabric, feeding it blood and water until it grew into shape. On her brow they placed a crown, an intricate wreath of fungus and thorns, white mushrooms blooming beside rose-colored pustules that oozed sweet-smelling sap. Thorn vines wound through her hair, weaving around her temples and pressing gently into her scalp, drawing thin trails of blood that dried into black-red sigils. She smiled, dizzy with joy and reverence. She felt the pulse of the world in her veins. Papa's garden was blossoming, and she was his bride. As twilight fell, the music changed. The drums, made from stretched skin and hollowed stumps, beat a slower rhythm, deep and solemn. Villagers began to kneel as Elya was led to the altar. Her mother, Magda, kissed her hand and wept silent tears of joy, her own face haloed with fine yellow mold. "She brings the spring eternal," whispered one villager. "Oh, my beloved rot," said another, "the mother of spores." They chanted as they anointed Elya's feet in a thick paste of crushed petals and fermented honey. They whispered praise to the blooming Father, hands lifted skyward as the mists grew thick and warm around them. And none of them noticed the man at the edge of the forest. He had arrived at dawn, a lone traveler in the faded red and backlock cloak of a midden-land wayfarer, bearing the sealed satchel of a courier and a longsword worn smooth at the grip. His name had been lost to the winds by the time he stepped into Grotholt's strange garden of joy. He had watched in silence, first with confusion, then with revulsion. He had seen festivals before, but never one where the fruit wept pus when bitten, or where children's laughter ended in coughing fits that sprayed spores into the air. He had seen Elya, radiant and crowned, and watched as villagers pressed their lips to her hands and feet like pilgrims before a shrine. He had seen the flowers blink, and he had tried to run. He turned from the square just as the music reached its crescendo, spreading down the mud path that led toward the old trade road. The trees closed in quickly. The mists rolled thicker than he remembered. The birds did not sing. His foot caught on something soft, wet, spongy. He looked down and saw a carpet of mushrooms growing across the path where there had been only stones before. The air thickened. He coughed. Then again, his limbs grew sluggish, the light dimmed, and behind him something giggled, a high-pitched burbling sound like water draining from a plugged sink. Then dozens of giggles, a nursery of grotesque mirth. He drew his blade with a trembling hand, swinging wildly at the mist, but it was already too late. In the square, Elya's eyes fluttered closed as she lifted her hands to the sky. She felt it, the life snuffed out like a candle in a windless room, a soul given to the garden. The villagers cheered, swaying in ecstasy, their mouths wide and filled with seeds. The mist thickened, dancing with bioluminescent motes. Elya lowered her arms, and a shudder passed through the soil beneath them. Beneath the altar, a flower opened, wet and red and wide like a wound. The Festival of Blossoms had claimed its first offering, and the garden was pleased. Chapter 6. The Decay Deepens. Morning broke, though it was difficult to tell through the pale green mist that had become the sky. The air no longer carried the sharp bite of spring. It was thick, wet, and sweet, filled with the scent of blossoms, sweat, and faint decay. Flies hummed in lazy clouds that drifted between cottages. The wind itself seemed alive, carrying whispers that sounded too close to laughter. Grotholt had changed beyond recognition. The neat rows of fields had dissolved into a crawling tapestry of life that knew no order. Tangled vines, moss-covered fences, and bulbous fruit swelling fat with viscous sap. The soil pulsed faintly when one stepped on it, as if the earth had developed a heartbeat. And at the center of it all, beneath the boughs of the great plague tree that had once been the village well, sat Elya, the bride of blossoms. She was weaving garlands again, humming to herself. Her voice was softer now, low and sweet, carrying the rhythm of the earth. Her hands were graceful, but her fingers had thickened. The nails darkened and split. She didn't notice the patches of mold creeping across her skin, pale green spreading in delicate filigree patterns up her arms like ivy on old stone. Her eyes watered constantly, though the tears were no longer clear. They ran milky and viscous, streaking her cheeks with a faintly sweet-smelling pus. When she blinked, she could feel the stickiness pull at her lashes, but in her reflection, caught in the sheen of a water barrel nearby, she saw only radiance. Her skin glowed, her hair shone like sunlight caught in amber. The small fungi that bloomed along her collarbone were flowers, not rot. The soft, warm wetness of her flesh was not decay. It was fertility, life, abundance. She was beautiful. She knew she was beautiful. Papa said so in her dreams. All around her, her children, the people of Grotholt, tended their gardens and sang. Old men walked the lanes shirtless, their bellies swollen with growths that pulsed like second hearts. Their tumors split open in places, revealing little mouths that laughed when they did, or tiny vines that reached for sunlight. The women wore garlands of thorn and moss, and their hair crawled with tiny white beetles that combed through their locks like doting attendants. Children rolled in puddles that gleamed like oil, giggling as the water clung to their skin and left behind a sheen of slime. Their eyes sparkled, and when they coughed, clouds of gold dust drifted out, carried by the wind like blessings. No one was ill, no one was sad. Every smile was genuine, every breath filled with the perfume of the Father's love. And in Elya's heart, a new warmth had begun to grow, a companion to the one that whispered in her dreams. It began a few nights after the festival. She had awoken to the sound of bubbling laughter beneath her bed. When she looked, she found nothing but a puddle of greenish slime, faintly phosphorescent, seeping from between the floorboards. She had watched it for hours, too mesmerized to be afraid. Ability moved. From the muck rose a tiny creature, round and wobbling, no taller than her knee. Its skin was the color of a bruised pear, glistening with moisture. Two beady black eyes blinked from its squashed face, and a wide, lipless mouth split open in a grin so absurdly joyous that Elya laughed aloud. It gurgled, burped, then let out a delighted squeal. "Poxy!" it cried in a voice like bubbling stew. "Poxy's here! Papa sent Poxy to keep you company." Elya tilted her head, fascinated. The creature waddled closer, trailing tiny footprints of pus and spore. When it reached her, it climbed clumsily into her lap, patting her arm with sticky fingers. "Don't be afraid, Blossom Mama," Popsy said. "Papa loves you. He loves all your pretties. He says your garden's growing nicely." Elya smiled, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're beautiful." Poxy giggled, jiggling happily. "Ooh, you're sweet," it crooned, nuzzling against her. "Most mortals scream. They don't see the love in the rot, but you do. You see Papa's gifts." From that night on, Poxy never left her side. He slept curled beside her like a fat, spoiled cat, snoring wetly. By day he followed her through the village, babbling cheerfully, plucking flies from the air and eating them with loud crunches. When she tended the gardens, he perched on her shoulder and offered advice in his gurgling voice. "Too much sun for that one, see? Needs a little more shade, a little more damp. Papa loves the damp." When she blessed a newborn calf covered in glistening warts, Poxy clapped tiny hands and declared it perfectly splendid. At night, he told her stories of Papa's great garden beyond the veil of the world, where everything bloomed forever, where nothing ever died, only changed. "Even the flies have wings made of gold there," he said dreamily one night, lying on his back in a patch of moss. "And the rivers are thick with milk and rock. You'll see it soon, Blossom Mama. Papa's saving a corner just for you." Elya lay beside him, watching the fungal glow in the rafters, and smiled. "I can feel him closer every day." Poxy's grin widened. "That's because he is closer. He's proud of you. Every flower that grows, every cough that spreads a little more love into the air, that's Papa's kiss." Elya closed her eyes and sighed. The cottage creaked around them, vines crawling across the beams. A soft drizzle of spores fell from the ceiling like golden snow. Outside, the villagers sang in the fields, their voices rising in harmony with the croaks of frogs and the buzzing of flies. The crops swayed in time to their song, fat with promise. The world smelled of life and rot and sweetness, tangled together until there was no telling them apart. And in that warm, pulsing heart of corruption, Elya smiled, her eyes leaking honey-colored tears, her skin soft as fungus. To her, it was paradise. To Papa, it was home. Chapter 7. Her Garden Grows. There were no more seasons in Grotholt. No autumn to wither the leaves, no winter to freeze the bones. The sun still rose and set, but its light had changed. filtered now through a greenish haze that lingered perpetually in the sky like old breath on glass. The villagers no longer counted days for what was time to flowers and rot. The garden had swallowed everything. Grotholt was no longer a village in any traditional sense. The homes, once modest timber cottages with clay chimneys, had been consumed by moss and creeping vines, their rooftops sagging under the weight of vibrant fungal growth. Chimneys had become hives for wasps the size of fists, their wings iridescent and veined like stained glass. Entire walls had turned soft and alive, pulsing faintly with sap and veins beneath bark-like skin. Some of the villagers chose to remain inside their transformed homes, becoming part of the walls themselves. Faces could still be seen in the bark, mouths opening in lazy grins when Elya passed. They did not speak anymore, but flowers bloomed from their tongues, and the vines that grew from their ribs trembled in response to her voice. Others roamed freely, their forms a harmonious union of flesh and flora. The blacksmith, once a thick-chested man with soot-stained hands, now bore an arm entirely composed of knotted roots and rusted iron. His chest had split open, revealing a nest of bees that buzzed gently as they pollinated his blooming organs. He hummed contentedly as he worked, reshaping old blades into spade-like tools for turning the soil. The butcher had become part mushroom, his spine coated in thick, meaty caps that released a pungent mist with every movement. He no longer needed knives. His fingers ended in bone-white talons that could carve meat and wood alike. When he smiled, wriggling tendrils emerged from between his teeth like curious worms, tasting the air. Even the animals had changed. The cows had sprouted thick, fungal horns, spongy and bulbous, dripping with sap that attracted butterflies with translucent wings. Their milk was a thick, sweet sludge that left a coating on the tongue and visions in the mind. The dogs now barked in harmonious chords, their fur gone to moss, tails wagging as birds nested in their backs. Birds, too, had changed. Some no longer flew, preferring to crawl on legs that ended in delicate vines. One such creature nested in Elya's hair for days, feeding on the spores she exhaled. There was no mourning in Grotholt. When a villager died, be it from collapse, rupture, or simple dissolution, they were not buried. Their bodies were placed gently in the soil, faces kissed and blessed with a handful of damp compost. Within days their forms erupted into glorious bloom. One woman had grown into a tree whose branches bore fruits shaped like small, smiling faces. Her husband now watered her each morning and whispered sweet nothings into her bark. Death was not an ending. It was the beginning of another song. Elya drifted through this paradise with no memory of how long it had been since the festival. Time bled and blurred. Days slipped past her like smoke, scented with cinnamon and rot. Sometimes she sat by the pond that had once been the village's ducking hole. It was now a stew of algae and life, thick with water lilies the size of shields. The lilies whispered secrets to her, secrets she didn't understand, but loved regardless. Poxy still accompanied her, waddling happily, sometimes nesting in her lap like a spoiled child. He was larger now, rounder, dripping constantly with a sticky, iridescent ooze that left trails wherever he rolled. When he laughed, which was often, flowers would sprout at his feet. "Papa's so proud of you," he would tell her, every day. "He's watching through every petal, every puff of spore. He's smiling, Blossom Mama." And Elya would smile too, tears leaking from her golden, infected eyes. She no longer wept out of sorrow, only joy. Her body had become something more than human. Where once she had smooth, soft skin, she now bore a living tapestry of moss, spores, and budding fungi. Her bones shifted subtly beneath her flesh, bending with unnatural grace. Her feet had fused partially with the soil, and roots now coiled down into the ground whenever she stood still for too long. She found herself singing often, without words. Her voice summoned strange creatures, things that crawled from the shadows to bask in her presence. They circled her like fireflies, blinking in and out of visibility. One morning she awoke to find a halo of vines grown directly into her scalp. They had bloomed overnight into a crown of black blossoms with tiny mouths that whispered praise in voices that mimicked her own. Beautiful, they sighed. So loved, so full of bloom. Even her breath had become sacred. She could exhale spores that brought vision, laughter, ecstasy. She had become the center of the garden, its heart, its womb, its soul. Yet she felt no fear, no sorrow for what had been. The memories of old Grotholt, the market days, the temple bells, the fearful whispers, were like brittle bones buried beneath soft loam. In their place bloomed affection, joy, connection. Papa was always near. She could feel him through the soil, his great hand cupped beneath the village like a gardener cradling his favorite bloom. His love was everywhere, in the moist air, the crooning vines, the joyous eyes of her people. She was no longer Elya the daughter, nor Elya the healer. She was the garden's bride, the Bloommother, and she was closer to love than she had ever dreamed possible. Chapter 8. The Tainted Pilgrim. The wind that rolled across Grotholt that morning carried with it a new scent. Not rot, not the sweet corruption of blooming fungus, but something metallic and scorched. The air grew heavy, thick with tension, and the creatures of the garden grew still. Flowers closed their mouths, vines recoiled slightly into the soil, and even Poxy, usually a ball of laughter and gurgling delight, went quiet, his bloated form retreating behind Elya's skirts like a child hiding from a stranger. Elya stood barefoot in the garden, her toes sunken into the warm loam, her arms raised as she guided a newborn bloom from the chest of a recently deceased villager. The corpse's mouth was agape, joyous even in death, as from within the ribcage a crimson rose twisted skyward, petals shimmering with dew that sizzled softly in the sunlight. The bloom's opening was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, and too heavy for any natural steed. Each step struck the earth like a war drum. The villagers turned as one, their eyes clouded with spores and joy, gazing toward the path that led to the outside world. Few now remembered what lay beyond Grotholt, but something old stirred in their bones as the mist parted. Through the trees emerged a figure that did not belong. He sat astride a monstrous bloated beast, part horse, part toad, its hide crusted with boils and iron plates bolted into flesh. Its breath came in wet, rumbling huffs, and from its open sores crawled flies as large as a man's thumb. Upon its back rode a chaos warrior of Nurgle, cloaked in a rusted shroud, his armor a patchwork of corroded plate, rotted leather, and bone. His helm bore a single horn, black and cracked, and from its grill oozed a steady stream of yellowed ichor that hissed as it hit the ground. His presence was immense. The garden seemed to shrink around him, not in fear but in reverence. Elya stepped forward, the breath catching in her chest. The villagers fell to their knees, not in terror, but awe. The warrior's gaze found hers instantly, and he dismounted with a slow grace that belied the weight of his frame. He said nothing for a long while, only walked toward her across the spongy earth, each step pressing spores into the soil that blossomed behind him like footprints of decay. When he finally spoke, his voice was not just a sound, it was a weight, a resonance that shivered through flesh and bone alike. You were the one he chose. Elya tilted her head, eyes leaking golden tears, her fungal crown swaying slightly as it adjusted to the warrior's presence. I am the Blossom Bride, she said softly. His garden is my heart. The warrior knelt, not out of submission but in solemnity. Up close his armor bore the signs of centuries of decay. Flies clung to his joints, and strange, blooming growths pushed through the cracks between plates. A single beetle crawled across the bridge of his helm and vanished into the mouth slit, unbothered. "I am Harzal the Tainted," he said, "chosen of the seventh bloom, bearer of the plague star. Papa Nurgle sent me from the garden beyond. I have walked through warp storms and rivers of pus, past the gates of pestilence and the festering groves of eternal spring. I bring an invitation." He reached into a pouch on his belt and withdrew a chalice grown from bone and coral-like fungus. Within it swirled a fluid the color of melted copper, steaming faintly, alive with writhing larvae. "Drink and be taken to him. Your groom waits with outstretched arms." The villagers gasped in wonder. The trees seemed to groan. Even the petals of the great plague tree turned toward her, expectant. Elya's fingers hovered above the chalice. She could feel his love in it, tangible, overflowing. Her heart swelled. A part of her longed to step beyond the veil, to be cradled in his arms, to lose herself fully in the eternal embrace of the blooming Father. But as her fingers touched the rim of the cup, she stopped. She looked around, at her garden, at the villagers she had nurtured, at the soil she had bled into, the flowers she had named, at Poxy, who peeked from behind a toadstool, his eyes wide and wet with worry. She felt the garden's breath, the thrum of life within decay, the hum of love reborn from rot. She looked back at the chalice, then gently pushed it away. "I am his bride," she said softly, "but this garden needs tending. It is not ready, not yet." Harzal remained still. The wind moaned through the trees. After a long pause he bowed his head. "He will not mourn your choice. He is patient. All rot ripens in time." He stood, returning the chalice to his pouch. Without another word he turned, remounted his beast, and began the long, slow ride back through the mist. Elya watched until he vanished, then turned to her garden, her hands outstretched. Vines reached for her fingers. The plague tree shivered in joy. The garden had chosen her, and she, in turn, had chosen it. Chapter 9. The Scent of the Empire. The wind that morning carried with it something alien, something sharp, acrid, and clean. It was the smell of oil, metal, and gunpowder, the scent of empire. Grotholt had not known that smell for many months. Its air was heavy with sweetness and rot, its wind slow and syrupy, humming with spores and life. The intrusion of that sharp, foreign tang was like a blade through soft flesh. The garden stirred uneasily, the vines recoiled, the moss underfoot rippled, and the songbirds with too many eyes fell silent in the canopy. Even the plague tree's vast boughs seemed to tense, its blossoms shuddering their mouths. Elya felt it immediately. She was kneeling by the pond that morning, her fingers trailing in the greenish water as she hummed a lullaby that had no beginning or end. Poxy was bobbing nearby, half submerged, his tiny arms flapping like an excited child's. He was teaching a cluster of tadpoles, each with miniature human faces, to sing praises to Papa. But when the wind changed, he froze. His grin faltered. His head tilted. "Bad smell," he whispered. "Burny smell. Papa doesn't like that one." Elya straightened slowly. She could feel it too, a tension in the soil beneath her, a quiet panic running through the garden's veins. Then she heard it. The faint creak of leather, the clink of metal, voices. They came from beyond the mist-shrouded borders of Grotholt, from the narrow trail that led back toward the Empire. Through the veils of fog, torchlight flickered. The sound of boots and horses echoed faintly. Elya rose, her fungal gown rustling, Her vines shifted across her shoulders like living jewelry. The scent grew stronger, burnt incense, alchemical oils, the bitter tang of faith and fire. Poxy whimpered and hid beneath the pond's surface, leaving only bubbles. And then they came. A dozen riders cloaked in black and gray, their wide-brimmed hats shadowing faces pale with pious fury. At their head rode a tall man whose coat gleamed with sigils of Sigmarite purity. His face was lined and hard, his eyes glacial beneath a scar that cut from temple to cheek. A pistol hung at his belt, and a greatsword, engraved with holy scripture, lay strapped across his back. Behind him came men carrying torches and crossbows, and others dragging casks marked with twin-tailed comets, oil and pitch. Witch hunters. By order of the Templars of Sigmar, the lead rider's voice boomed, this place is condemned. The mist parted reluctantly before them, and for the first time, Grotholt's grotesque glory was revealed to foreign eyes. What they saw turned even hardened men pale. Once houses now pulsed with veins like flesh. Fruit the size of skulls hung from branches that reached out to stroke the air. A woman smiled at them from the path, her face serene and glowing, until she turned, revealing a second mouth blooming from her neck that whispered prayers to Nurgle. The horses reared. The witch hunters drew weapons. "Burn it," the leader barked. "Purge it all." The first torch struck a vine, and the fire caught with a hiss. The flames burned bright, but the vines screamed as they died, curling inward like living things. The soil convulsed. Then the garden fought back. The villagers came, smiling, their faces luminous and serene. They carried no weapons, only baskets of flowers, garlands of fungus, fruits that pulsed faintly. They came, singing, their voices low and melodic, filling the air with words the hunters could not understand. A crossbow bolt struck one in the chest, splitting flesh, but instead of falling, he laughed. Thick green sap spilled from the wound, and from it sprouted a spray of tiny mushrooms that grew and burst, releasing clouds of yellow spores. The man's laughter turned into a wet, joyous gurgle as vines erupted from his mouth, wrapping around the nearest witch hunter's leg. The square became chaos. Pistols roared, fire spread, the screams of the dying mingled with the delighted laughter of the blessed. Blood splashed onto the ground, feeding the soil, which answered in kind, sprouting writhing shoots from corpses before they even fell cold. Elya walked through it all in silence. She moved like a dream through the nightmare, her bare feet leaving blossoms in her wake. Her eyes wept pus and light, her skin gleamed with dew, her hair alive with crawling petals. Where she stepped, the ground pulsed brighter. Bullets struck her and sank into her flesh without harm, swallowed by the spongy bloom that covered her skin. When the lead witch hunter saw her, he froze. She was magnificent, a vision of beauty so terrible that his faith faltered. "Ah," whispered, "demon." She tilted her head, smiling gently. "I am love," she said simply. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot hit her squarely in the chest, but instead of blood, golden spores exploded outward, glowing like sunlight through amber. The air shimmered. The hunter coughed, choking, as the dust clung to his beard and armor, seeping into every pore. He tried to speak an oath, but laughter bubbled from his throat instead. He dropped to his knees, gasping between fits of mirth. His skin began to flush, then crack, then bloom. Tiny flowers pushed through his cheeks, his eyes, his lips. His veins blackened, bursting into roots that spilled across his skin like tattoos. Elya knelt beside him, cradling his head in her hands as he wept tears of honey. She whispered, "It's all right. You're part of the garden now." His last breath came out as a sigh of joy, his final words a whispered, "Beautiful." When he fell still, his chest split open like a seed pod, and from it grew a cluster of white lilies. The flames that had begun to devour the outskirts of Grotholt now guttered and died, smothered by the wave of life that spread from that moment. The soil swelled, the vines surged, and the air was thick with the scent of renewal and rot. By dusk, no witch hunter remained. Their armor lay empty, rusting beneath the flowers that bore their faces. Elya stood in the center of the garden, the mist around her pulsing gently with light. Poxy waddled out from hiding, clapping his hands and giggling. "You did it, Bloommother. You gave them Papa's love." Elya smiled faintly, her breath soft and perfumed. "They were afraid," she said, "but now they understand." Above them, the plague tree swayed, shedding glowing spores into the air like drifting stars. As night fell, Grotholt sang once more, its hymn of decay and devotion echoing into the dark woods, carried on a wind that smelled faintly of flowers and death. Chapter 10. The Gift of Madness. The days, or what passed for them, bled together like ink into stagnant water. The light over Grotholt had changed again. It was neither dawn nor dusk, but something perpetual and golden green, as if the sun had swollen and decayed in the heavens. The air shimmered faintly, dense with spores that drifted like motes of gold dust, making every breath taste faintly of sugar and soil. The world itself seemed to sigh in rhythm with Elya's pulse. She no longer remembered how long it had been since the witch hunters came. Time had become meaningless, just another thread that had unraveled and melted into Papa's tapestry. The garden had expanded beyond Grotholt's edges, swallowing the old trade road and the neighboring farms. The land was a living hymn now, root and flesh entwined, the soil veined with slow-moving ichor that glowed faintly beneath the surface. And Elya, the bride of blossoms, the Bloommother, had begun to change again. She woke each morning with a fullness inside her, a warmth that pulsed beneath her ribs like a heartbeat, not her own. At first she had thought it joy, then hunger. But soon she understood. It was love, creation, the Father's seed of renewal. Sometimes, at night, she could feel it move. The first time she gasped in delight, pressing her hands to her stomach. Beneath her palms something shifted, a slow, rolling pressure that made her veins hum. Poxy had been there, blinking sleepily beside her moss bed. When she told him what she felt, he had clapped his slimy hands and squealed, "A gift! Papa's gift! The seed of rebirth!" And she had laughed, weeping with joy. "I can feel him," she whispered. "He's growing inside me. He's beautiful." After that, she stopped sleeping altogether. Her nights became vigils, long trance-like hours spent whispering to the heartbeat inside her, her words now an alien language that flowed from her tongue like honey and bile. It was not speech as mortals knew it, the syllables twisted, alive, crawling from her throat as soft burbles and guttural croons, as if the sounds themselves were trying to take root in the air. The villagers began to hear her prayers in their dreams. They awoke with smiles and new growths on their skin, their eyes weeping spores. Some said they could hear the Bloommother's unborn child whispering back, cooing through the vines at night, calling them brothers and sisters. Elya no longer questioned these things. Her mind, what had once been hers, was vast and blooming, a garden of thoughts not her own. When she closed her eyes, she saw the garden beyond, a paradise of filth and love, where all things lived forever in joyous decay. She heard his laughter, bubbling and wet, like a father watching his children play in the mud. She spoke often to him now, not in prayer but in conversation, sometimes aloud, sometimes in the deep silence of her mind. "My sweet Elya," his voice would whisper, "the rot takes hold, the bloom spreads, you are my heart made flesh." And she would smile, tears of pus rolling down her cheeks. "I am yours, Papa. forever. Yet not all shared her bliss. There was one who had resisted longer than the rest, a man named Bran, the miller's son. Once broad and strong, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, he lingered at the edge of the garden like a ghost that refused to pass on. His family had been among the first to change, their bodies entwined in the roots of the old windmill. He alone had not accepted the father's love. He watched Elya as she walked among the flowers, her belly swollen with divine promise, her voice a soft hum that made the vines twist and bloom in her wake. When he could bear it no longer, he stepped into her path. "Elya," he croaked, his voice cracked and thin from disuse. "You must stop this. Please." The word "stop" sounded foreign in that place. The garden quieted at its utterance, vines retracting slightly, petals tightening. "Effort I made," Victor said. Elya turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly, her lips parted in a smile of pure, childlike affection. "Stop," she echoed, tilting her head. "Why would I stop, dear Bren? Don't you see? We are saved." He took a step forward, his hand shaking. "This isn't salvation. Look around you. This is rot, sickness, madness." She only laughed, the sound bright and musical. "Madness? Oh, Bren." She reached out, brushing her damp fingers along his cheek. He flinched at the touch, though her skin was soft and warm, alive with faint movement beneath. "Madness is just another word for change. Can't you feel it? The peace, the joy?" He slapped her hand away, tears streaking his dirt-caked face. "They're dead, Elya. All of them. Your mother, the children, the priests, everyone. You've killed them." Her smile faltered, just a little. Then her eyes softened with pity. "No, Bran, I freed them." He backed away, shaking his head. "There's nothing left of you," he whispered. "Whatever that thing inside you is, it's not life. It's a curse. I'll end it, Elya. I'll end you if I have to." She sighed, gently, almost sadly, and stepped closer. The vines around her stirred, their tips curling like serpents waiting to strike. "You don't understand," she said softly. "But that's all right. Not everyone can bloom." He raised a knife, rusted, trembling in his hand. But before he could move, she kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion or anger, but of mercy. Her lips pressed to his, warm and wet, and from that touch spilled a cloud of golden-green spores that shimmered in the air like starlight. Bren tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the music of it, the hum of life taking root. He dropped the knife. His knees buckled. His eyes rolled back, then fluttered open again, wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," he gasped. She held him as he sank to the ground, his breath coming in soft, ecstatic sighs. His veins blackened, his skin bubbled, and from within his chest flowers pushed free, white blossoms tinged with red, fragrant and weeping. When he was gone, she laid him among the roots and kissed his brow. "Papa's kiss," she whispered. "Now you understand." That night, as the garden swayed in dreamless sleep, Elya sat beneath the plague tree, her swollen belly glowing faintly beneath her hands. The whispers in her mind grew louder, overlapping, melodic. The child within her stirred. And from far beyond the mortal veil, Papa laughed, a sound of joy and decay, of endings and beginnings intertwined. Elya closed her eyes, her smile serene. The garden was growing. Chapter 11. The Mirror of Flies. The day began like every other in Grotholt's endless bloom, humid, fragrant, and alive with the chorus of unseen things. The garden hummed softly, an unceasing lullaby of buzzing wings, rustling leaves, and faint rhythmic sighs that pulsed through the soil itself. The air was thick enough to taste, heavy with sweetness and decay. Elya wandered through her creation barefoot, her steps sinking into the soft, pulsating loam. The vines caressed her ankles like adoring pets. The flowers bowed as she passed. Every breath she took drew in the perfume of 1,000 blossoms, each one born from flesh, bone, and faith. She was content, or at least she believed she was. Her belly had grown heavy with what she called the seed of rebirth, her hands constantly resting upon it as though cradling a child. When she spoke, her voice carried a resonance now, a layered tone that sounded both within her and beyond her. Her people adored her still. The corrupted villagers of Grotholt tended the gardens that grew from their own bodies, singing hymns of joyous rot. Yet something lingered at the edge of her thoughts, a small, splintered echo that did not belong. A memory, perhaps. A dream. That morning, she heard it again. A faint voice beneath the drone of flies. A whisper that was not Papa's. It came from the old Varn cottage, her home before the bloom, the place where her mother had once coughed through the night. The structure was almost gone now, its walls swollen with mold, the roof sagging under a thick carpet of moss. But something called her from within. She followed the voice inside. The air there was cooler, shadowed, quiet. The smell of old wood and mildew hung heavy, unmasked by the sweetness of the outer garden. The floor was soft, spongy with rot, and each step released a faint sigh of damp air. As she moved through the dimness, she brushed aside a curtain of vines. Behind them, hidden beneath the encroaching growth, she found an object half buried in the wall. A tall, tarnished mirror. It was the one that had belonged to her mother. Its silver had blackened with age and moisture, the frame crawling with tiny insects. The glass was clouded, warped, and alive with movement. Peter smiled, making sure they were alone in the room. Flies. They coated its surface in a shifting blanket, their bodies a living, buzzing mosaic. They moved in spirals, crawling over one another in a pattern that seemed deliberate, almost intelligent. Elya stepped closer. "Show me," she whispered, though she did not know why. The flies froze. Then, as if obeying an unspoken command, they began to part, spiraling outward until the glass beneath was revealed. For the first time in many months, Elya saw her reflection. And she screamed. The sound that tore from her throat was not human. It was the keening of something raw and newly born, a sound of breaking. The woman in the mirror was a monster. Her skin sagged in folds, slick with moisture and crawling with life. Fungus grew from her neck and shoulders like grotesque jewelry, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. Her once beautiful hair had fused with vines, twisting into cords that dripped with sap. Her eyes, oh, her eyes, glowed with a sickly golden light, weeping trails of pus that shimmered like honey. Her lips were cracked and blistered, her teeth darkened, her belly vast and veined with tendrils that moved beneath the surface. She stumbled backward, tripping over the vines. Her knees hit the ground, sinking into the soft rock. "No!" she gasped, clutching her face. Her fingers came away slick, the skin peeling faintly beneath her nails. "No, no, no!" The mirror's reflection did not mimic her perfectly. It watched her, its movements delayed by a heartbeat. And when she looked up again, the Elya within the glass smiled, a slow, knowing smile that did not reach its eyes. "You are beautiful," it whispered, though the voice was not her own. It was Papa's voice, warm, deep, full of love. She shook her head, sobbing. Why do I look like this? Why did you do this to me?" The reflection's mouth did not move now, but the air around her thickened, trembling with his laughter, low and bubbling, like distant thunder. "Little Blossom," came the voice. "Why do you cry?" She pressed her hands to her ears. I wanted to bring life. I wanted to heal her, not this. Not... You did. The words silenced her. You have given more life than any mortal ever could. Look at your garden, child. Every leaf, every root, every breath of this sacred air sings your name. Through your love, the world has been made whole again. I'm rotting, she cried, her voice breaking. I am falling apart. You are changing. His voice grew softer, filled with affection that was almost unbearable. Decay is not death, Elya. It is the promise of renewal. All things that live must break down so new life may bloom. You are my vessel, my bride, the womb of the new dawn. Through your flesh I love the world anew. She trembled, tears spilling freely now. The vines around her reached out, stroking her face like tender hands. But it hurts, she whispered. Albert does. The flies on the mirror began to move again, forming patterns, circles, spirals, fractals of impossible design. The reflection blurred and twisted until it was no longer a mirror but a window, a vision of Papa's garden beyond. She saw it then, a realm vast and endless, where fields of rot stretched to the horizon, glistening with dew made of pus and tears. Great trees grew from mountains of bone, their branches heavy with blossoms that sang. Daemons danced among the fungi, their laughter a symphony of love. And above it all, vast and formless, loomed Papa himself, a shape too immense to comprehend, yet radiating warmth and tenderness. Do you see now, my blossom? His voice was everywhere, inside her, around her, through her. This is love eternal. This is the truth of life. She gazed upon it, trembling. Her grief faded, replaced by a kind of holy awe. Her body no longer felt heavy or broken. It felt full, radiant, purposeful. When she looked back at the mirror, her reflection smiled again. This time, she smiled with it. The flies rose from the glass in a great cloud, swirling around her like a living halo. They brushed her skin, soft as feathers, and where they touched, the pain eased. Papa, she whispered, her voice calm now, reverent. Forgive me. I doubted your gift. And in the depths of her mind, his laughter, thick, joyful, endless, embraced her like a father's arms. The last remnants of her humanity dissolved in that sound, replaced by perfect, blissful peace. When she left the cottage, the mirror lay still. The flies had returned to their roost upon its surface, and in the faint light that filtered through the vines, the reflection that remained was smiling still. Chapter 12. The Bloom Beyond. The final time Grotholt was spoken of in an imperial ledger, it was listed in a trade manifest carried by a road warden through Ostland. Grotholt, 14 bushels grain, 6 barrels of dried root, 1 bolt of linen. A week later, the road vanished. Not washed away, not overgrown. Gone. The scouts who rode north in search of the path found nothing. Trees where there should have been none, fields that had never been planted, fog so thick and warm it clung like skin, muffling footsteps and swallowing voices. And beyond the mist, something else. The maps began to change, or rather, the scribes stopped including Grotholt altogether, as though it had never existed, as though the land itself had exhaled and let it drift away, like a petal on a fetid breeze. To the people within, time meant nothing. Days no longer began or ended. Light came and went in pulses like breath. The sun above Grotholt was a mottled haze now, a dull orb veiled behind layers of fragrant cloud. The sky itself seemed to drip with spores. The moon, when visible, glowed green and wept rivulets of sludge that evaporated before touching ground. The garden had grown vast. not just wider, but deeper. Caves had opened where none had been, fissures from which thick vines rose, pumping bile into the air. Rivers now flowed not with water, but viscous, luminescent slime that bubbled and sang lullabies in Nurgle's tongue. Birds had become moss-covered, flightless things with too many beaks. Trees bore fruit that groaned in pleasure when picked, and the villagers, what was left of them, had changed beyond names. They had become things of joy and purpose, their flesh indistinguishable from the garden. Some walked no longer, but took root where they stood, their minds stretching like canopies across the glade. Others melted into the ground and became nutrients, whispering their thanks to the soil even as their bones dissolved. At the center of this paradise stood Elya. Her feet had fused with the ground long ago. Her legs had become the trunk of a living throne, thick and veined, wrapped in flowering vines that pulsed with sap. Her belly, still swollen with Papa's promised seed, glowed faintly, illuminating her fungal gown from within. Her hands, now knotted with bark and bloom, outstretched like branches, welcomed every creature that came near with open arms. And now it was time to plant the final gift, the plague tree. It had come to her in a vision the night before, in one of the rare moments when her dreams and Papa's will became indistinguishable. She had seen a sapling wrapped in golden pus, its leaves shaped like fingers, its roots spreading in fractal patterns through time and space. It would not just grow, it would unmake, and from that unmaking it would bless. The villagers, those who could still move, gathered in the central glade. Creatures of all shapes and origins came too, slug beasts, moss hounds, fly-ewed deer, and things with no name that slithered and sang. They gathered not in fear nor awe, but joy. Poxy, bloated and radiant, danced in circles around Elya, burbling, it's time, Papa's tree will stretch all the way to the garden beyond." Elya raised her hands, and the garden held its breath. A low moan rippled through the ground as she reached into her womb, not with fingers, but with roots, and drew forth the seed. It was not a seed in any true sense, but a pulsing gelatinous mass that blinked with inner light. It oozed joy and warmth, smelling of honeyed blood and earth after rain. She held it high, and the garden sang. Then she planted it. The moment it touched soil, the earth cracked open, not with violence, but with welcome. 1,000 vines uncoiled and embraced it, drawing it down into the deepest rot. The ground swelled, trembled, and then burst. The plague tree erupted upward, growing faster than any tree in mortal memory. Its trunk was the color of old bruises, bark peeling in long strips to reveal meat beneath. Its branches stretched like ribs across the sky, weeping strands of milky sap that sang in choral harmonies. From its knots and holes poured nurglings, small, grinning things, born fully formed, each one laughing as it tumbled into the world. They rolled down the roots in droves, giggling, kissing Elya's feet, hugging Poxy, chasing flies that bloomed like flowers. Some danced, others sang. One climbed up Elya's arm and nested in her hair, cooing, "Mama's tree is here. Mama's bloom is big and sticky and perfect." The spores released by the tree were heavier than air. They drifted in massive golden clouds across the land. Where they settled, things changed. Forests nearby grew still, their leaves blackening with ecstasy. Rivers choked with algae. Villages miles away woke to find their crops swollen, their children smiling with too many teeth. The bloom was spreading. The last remnants of the Empire's reach shrank back from the rot. Roads ended in fog. Trade wagons turned in fear. Clerics who dared enter did not return, or returned with eyes glowing and smiles too wide. Grotholt was no longer a place. It was a presence. a holy wound in the world, open and weeping. And Elya, from her throne beneath the plague tree, smiled through the tears of pus that streaked her cheeks. She could feel Papa's arms around her, could hear his laughter echoing through every blossom. She was no longer alone. Her garden had touched the world, and the world was beginning to bloom. Chapter 13. The Envoy of Rot. It arrived at dusk, when the sky above Grotholt wept green light and the clouds dripped with honeyed spores. The garden was calm, sated for the moment. The plague tree swayed gently in the windless air, its boughs rustling with the laughter of resting nurglings. The soil was warm, pulsing with sluggish breath. Elya stood beneath her throne of rot. Vines coiled about her limbs like royal garments. Her fungal gown had merged fully with her flesh, the blossoms across her chest sighing with each breath she took. She cradled a nurgling in the crook of one arm, a fresh one, newly born, its eyes still sticky with sap. Her smile was serene, her thoughts full of whispers and hymns. And then the garden screamed. It was not a scream of pain or rage, but of warning. The flowers snapped shut, the vines recoiled, the sap of the plague tree thickened, turning to tar. A ripple passed through the glade, like something had tugged on the weave of the world. Elya turned her head, and the air shimmered like oil on water. It stepped forth from the distortion with elegance and disdain, each movement a painting of arrogance. The daemon of Tzeentch was tall and lithe, its form ever-shifting, cloaked in swirling robes of color that defied reason, shades not born of sunlight, but of madness. Its face was a mask of eyes, no two alike, some blinking, others weeping, one wreathed in flame. Its arms shifted from talons to tendrils to delicate hands, adorned with rings that whispered prophecies in voices too high to hear. The garden groaned. The air grew cold. Poxy shivered and hid beneath Elya's robes, the nurgling in her arms, squeaking and burrowing into her shoulder. The demon bowed. "Dearest Elya," it said, voice like shattering glass, and bird-song in reverse. "What a marvelous bloom you've become." Elya narrowed her eyes. "You are not welcome here." The demon chuckled, its teeth now a swirling void. "Oh, but I bring gifts, beloved of the Plague God. You've grown so splendid, too splendid to wither in the mud of his love. Come, walk with me into a garden of possibility. My master sees what your father does not." It gestured, and for a heartbeat the air split. Through it, visions flickered. A throne of changing stars, rivers of living color, blossoms that sang equations of pure magic. Elya felt the pull of it, the vertigo of infinite potential. But then she looked down, at the nurgling asleep in her arms, at the vines curled protectively around her waist, at the soil that whispered her name with every breath. And her smile returned. "You mistake love for limitation," she said softly. "Papa's joy is not confinement, it is release." The demon's expression flickered, surprise, then irritation. "You speak of joy, but you are rot. You are disease. I offer you meaning, evolution. You are wasting your soul in his filth." Elya's eyes widened, and golden pus spilled from their corners. The air thickened around her, the garden rearing like a wounded beast. "I am his filth," she whispered, voice shaking with reverence. "His joy. His bride." Then she changed. The vines shot from her body, thick as serpents, eyes blooming along their length. Her belly split open, not in pain, but in purpose, revealing a pulsing heart of blooming corruption, golden light shining from within. Her laughter echoed like wind through catacombs, joyous and full of madness. The demon recoiled, snarling, its robes turning to flame. "You are mad!" Her laughter only grew. "Yes," she hissed, stepping forward, "mad with love." The ground beneath her exploded in bloom, towering mushrooms, blossoms with fanged mouths, and tendrils that slithered up the diamond's limbs. It screeched, twisting into new forms to escape, fish, fire, flock of screaming birds, but the garden adapted. The rot followed. Elya raised her hand, and from her palm erupted a cloud of spores, so thick and luminous it turned the air to gold. They poured over the demon like a tide, singing as they smothered. "You cannot change what is already perfect," she whispered, her voice layered with papa's tone. The demon screamed, its form unraveling, folding in on itself in bursts of light and gibbering madness. Before it vanished into the warp, it spat one final curse, one last promise of vengeance, and then it was gone. The garden exhaled, sagging with relief. The vines relaxed. The plague tree wept gently. Elya stood alone again, her belly pulsing with warmth, her arms full of sleeping life. Her breath came slow, her smile peaceful. She turned her face upward and felt him there, vast and tender. "I protected it, Papa," she whispered. "I kept our love safe." His reply was not in words, but in 1,000 blooming flowers, opening in unison, sighing her name into the wind. Elya closed her eyes, and from her lips fell soft, delirious laughter. Madness, perhaps, but also something deeper, using devotion, and with it came peace. Chapter 14. The Wedding of Spores. The night came heavy and thick like a fever. It was not dark, no Grotholt had not known true darkness for months. The sky above was a shifting ocean of green mist and amber light, the air alive with drifting spores that glowed softly, giving the illusion that the stars themselves had descended to dance among the trees. The garden breathed in slow, rhythmic heaves, the sound like a heartbeat beneath the soil. Everything hummed with anticipation. And in the heart of it all, Elya dreamed. It was no ordinary dream, but a vision spun from divine delirium, the fevered communion of mortal and God. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her garden, but standing in a forest unlike any she had ever known. The trees were titans of rot, their bark slick and weeping sap that smelled of death and honey. Their branches intertwined high above, forming arches of fungus and bone, from which hung strands of glistening slime that swayed gently in a wind she could not feel. Flowers as large as her head opened at her feet, releasing breaths of warm decay. Beneath her toes, the soil pulsed, alive, wet, and warm as flesh. It was a cathedral of corruption, and she knew with the certainty of faith that this was the garden beyond, the holy womb of her beloved. A low, resonant laughter filled the air, bubbling and tender, echoing from every shadow. It was not cruel nor mocking. It was loving, vast and uncontainable, a laugh that wrapped itself around her heart like a father's embrace. "My sweet Bloom," it rumbled. "My faithful bride." Elya trembled, tears of pus and joy spilling from her eyes. "Papa," she whispered, her voice quivering like a child's. "Come, my daughter," the voice crooned, as the trees bent inward, forming a path of oozing petals and moss. "Come, and be joined to me." He looked down. Before her lay a gown, if such a word could describe it. It was made of living mold, soft and quivering, threaded with veins that glowed faintly green. As she touched it, it sighed and wrapped itself around her body, growing and reshaping until it fit her perfectly. Flowers bloomed from her shoulders, and her belly, still radiant with the light of unborn life, was encircled with vines that pulsed like a heartbeat. Upon her head, a veil formed. It was spun from filaments of mycelium, delicate as lace yet damp with dew. It dripped with droplets of sweet-smelling ichor, and where they fell, mushrooms sprouted instantly. Beneath the veil, her face was radiant, if not beautiful in any human sense. Her features had softened and sagged, her skin marbled with rot and moss, her eyes twin orbs of molten gold. She felt no shame, only devotion. She began to walk. Each step sank into the soft ground, her footprints filling with small, wriggling maggots that grew into blossoms before her eyes. The trees leaned close, whispering secrets in voices made of sighs and creaks. Shapes moved in the mist, figures half seen, half felt. They were her congregation, villagers, nurglings, beasts, all standing as witnesses, their eyes bright with bliss. Some clapped, others swayed, all humming a melody older than the world. At the end of the path, a figure waited. He was vast, so vast that he could not truly be seen, only felt. The air thickened around him, every breath heavy with sweetness and rot. He was not a man, nor a beast, but something far greater, an ocean of life and decay, a mountain of love and disease. The ground trembled with his breath, and his laughter shook the very sky. Nurgle, the Plague Father. The air shimmered as his presence filled the world. From his unseen form dripped luminous pus that fell like rain, each droplet birthing tiny nurglings that tumbled to the ground, laughing and clapping their fat hands. Elya fell to her knees, overcome, pressing her face into the warm soil. "My lord," she whispered, her voice breaking with devotion. "My heart, my father, my love, I am yours." From above came a sound like 1,000 sighs, soft and full of joy. "You were always mine, little blossom," the voice murmured, "but tonight you shall be one with me." He extended something, an unseen hand, an essence, and it touched her brow. The contact was not pain nor pleasure, but both. Her body convulsed, her vision shattered into waves of color and rot. She saw every flower, every fungus, every microbe in the garden, all singing the same song. She felt every villager, every beast, every worm, all bound to her by threads of love and decay. And at the center of it all, Papa's heart. Vast, endless. The ground beneath her split open, releasing a gush of golden pus and soft light. From it rose tendrils that wrapped around her, lifting her up. She floated before him, her body weightless, her mind dissolving in ecstasy. "Do you accept my love?" he asked, feeling it. All that I am," she breathed. "Oh, you accept my purpose, every breath. Do you surrender your soul, yourself, your name?" She hesitated, but only for a moment. "I am Elya no longer," she said. "I am yours, forever." The air burst into a chorus of laughter, deep, rich, and endless. The tendrils pulled her close, wrapping around her completely, drawing her into the warm, pulsing light. It filled her lungs, her veins, her womb. She felt herself unravel, every thought replaced with his joy, every cell opening like a flower to receive his love. When she awoke, she was lying beneath the plague tree, the morning light filtering through its glistening leaves. The garden was silent, reverent. Around her, nurglings danced in slow circles, singing hymns in Papa's tongue. Her body was different, lighter, yet infinite. Her eyes glowed brighter, her veins shimmered beneath translucent skin. She could feel the pulse of the garden, not just beneath her feet, but within her blood. She smiled, tears of golden ichor trailing down her cheeks. The wedding was complete. Elya had died in her dream. What remained was something greater, the bride eternal, the spirit of the bloom, the mother of rotten renewal. And as the spores drifted across the horizon, spreading beyond the corpse of the world, she whispered the vows that bound her forever to her God. Where there is death, I will bring life. Where there is sorrow, I will bring joy. Where there is flesh, I will bring bloom. The Plague Father laughed, soft and tender, and the garden joined him. And thus began the age of the bloom beyond, a love story eternal, sung by rot and crowned in decay. Chapter 15. The Bride Eternal. The world could no longer hold her. The moment came softly, like the sigh of a lover before sleep. No thunder split the heavens, no divine trumpet heralded her apotheosis. The transition between flesh and eternity began as a tremor beneath the roots, a pulse that rippled through every petal, every worm, every drop of dew in the Garden of Grotholt. The soil convulsed in ecstasy. The air thickened, perfumed with rot and sweetness so dense it burned the lungs. The plague tree moaned with life, its branches writhing against a sky that had grown swollen and green. And at the heart of it all stood Elya. She had ceased to breathe days ago. Her chest no longer rose or fell, but her body moved still, guided by something larger, vaster, more ancient. The glow beneath her skin pulsed like magma, threads of gold and viridian running through her veins. Her fungal gown had fused with her flesh long ago, each bloom opening and closing in time with her pulse. The villagers, what remained of them, watched from their perches in the garden, silent and reverent. Many had taken root completely, their faces half buried in soil, yet their eyes wept in awe. Others crawled forward on twisted limbs to witness their mother's ascension, their mouths agape, their voices gone. She raised her arms toward the sky. The clouds above twisted into a spiral, a great churning wound in reality itself. Through it, light poured, a shifting kaleidoscope of disease and divinity, of love and entropy. It painted the world in hues no mortal eye could withstand. The air hummed with laughter, not cruel, not mocking, but joyous and infinite. Papa was coming. Elya's voice joined his song. It began as a whisper, fragile and tremulous, but it grew quickly, swelling with power until it rolled across the garden like thunder. The words she spoke were not of any mortal tongue. They were alive, each syllable birthing spores and blossoms that filled the air, choking the boundaries between the physical and the divine. The veil between worlds shivered. Reality folded inward, its edges softening like melting wax. The trees grew taller, their roots spreading through both soil and shadow. The sky peeled away, revealing not stars, but an endless sea of color, shifting, pulsing, laughing. Poxy and the Nurglings danced around her feet, shrieking in delight. "It's happening!" Poxy howled, spinning in circles, his little body dripping with glowing slime. "She's blooming for real! She's blooming forever!" Elya's skin began to dissolve, not in decay but in transformation. Her limbs elongated, her bones melting into fluid grace. Her flesh became translucent, the patterns of her veins forming runes of living rot. Wings of dripping mold unfurled from her back, vast and tattered, yet radiant, each beat releasing a gust of spores that shimmered like fireflies. Her face shifted, becoming something both monstrous and heartbreakingly beautiful. Her golden eyes expanded until they filled her face, twin suns of warmth and madness. Her mouth split into a smile that was both tender and infinite. She was no longer human. She was no longer Elya. She was Elya the Bloom Eternal, bride of the Plague God, mother of rot and rebirth. Daemon princess of decay and delight. Her laugh, oh, her laugh, rolled through the garden, a sound of such joy and love that the air itself trembled. Flowers burst into bloom at its echo. The villagers screamed and wept, their bodies splitting open to release new life. The plague tree shuddered violently, its trunk cracking open to reveal a heart that beat in unison with hers. The boundaries of the mortal world could take no more. The mists rose, thick and golden, consuming the edges of Grotholt. The earth heaved as though drawing breath, and the sky fell inward. The village, the garden, the plague tree, all of it began to rise, roots tearing from reality like cords snapping under tension. For a heartbeat it hovered, half in the world, half in the warp, and then it was gone. Where Grotholt had once stood, there was nothing. Not ruin, not ash, not even silence. The land was blank, stripped of memory, the air faintly warm with a scent none could name. Travelers would speak in hushed tones of a fog that sometimes rolled across the northern hills, golden, sweet, and terrible, that whispered with laughter and left mushrooms growing in their footprints. But Grotholt itself was no longer of this plane. It now floated in Papa's garden, suspended in the realm of chaos like a petal upon an endless sea. There, time meant nothing, and decay was bliss. The plague tree had grown colossal, its roots entwined with the bones of stars. Nurglings by the thousands danced in its boughs, their songs echoing across infinity. Rivers of pus and nectar ran through the soil, feeding blossoms that bloomed in 1,000 impossible shapes. And at the heart of that paradise stood Elya. Her body, vast and glorious, pulsed with divine light. From her back sprouted wings so immense they stretched across horizons. Her laughter was constant now, echoing through the warp in tones both terrifying and tender, a sound that made lesser demons weep and mortals dream of gardens they could never reach. She looked down upon her domain, upon the endless cycle of life and death she had birthed, and her heart swelled with boundless affection. Every maggot, every flower, every drop of rot was hers. And above her, beyond the veil of her own bloom, she felt him. Papa. He did not speak. He didn't need to. His love poured over her in waves, filling every corner of her being. His laughter joined hers, their voices twining through eternity, father and bride, creator and creation, two halves of the same unending cycle. And so the bride eternal sang. Her song rippled across the warp, through realms of light and shadow alike, through the dreams of mortals and the nightmares of gods. It spoke of love found in ruin, of joy within decay, of life's eternal, weeping bloom. Her voice would never fade, her laughter would never die. For Elya, the blossom bride, was no longer bound by mortality. She was the garden itself, ever graying, ever loving, ever rotting. And in the heart of chaos, where all things end and begin again, the sound of her blissful, maddened laughter bloomed eternal,